Olivia smirked, tilting her head ever so slightly, her lips curling in that familiar condescending way that had once made Julian question his own instincts. Tonight, it only confirmed what he already knew. The candlelight from the restaurant flickered across her flawless skin, casting shadows that danced over the confident glint in her eyes. She leaned in, voice low and dripping with certainty. "You'll never leave me," she whispered, her fingers tracing slow, meaningless patterns along the stem of her wineglass. Julian let the moment stretch, allowed her to bask in the illusion she had so carefully built for herself. He had seen this exact performance before, Olivia playing the role of the untouchable queen, believing herself indestructible. He had watched her rehearse this moment in her own mind, convinced of her victory. He offered her a small, knowing smile. Then, without a word, he reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a simple, unassuming envelope. It landed on the table between them with a soft thud, its presence immediately shifting the air between them. Olivia's smirk twitched. She stared at the envelope as if it were a foreign object, an intruder in her perfectly curated world. For a fleeting second, Julian saw the confusion in her eyes, the uncertainty creeping in at the edges. But she recovered quickly, letting out a light laugh, tilting her head the other way now, feigning amusement. "What's this?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral, but Julian could hear the way it tightened at the edges. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up, adjusting his cufflinks with meticulous precision, as if this entire conversation were nothing more than a minor formality before moving on with his evening. Olivia watched him, her smirk now completely gone, replaced with something else. Something closer to unease. Julian leaned down slightly, just enough so that his words reached only her ears. "Open it when you get home," he murmured. "And when you do, you'll understand." And with that, he walked away, leaving Olivia sitting there, her fingers frozen around the wineglass, her reflection staring back at her in the deep red liquid. The envelope remained untouched, a single undeniable crack in the illusion of control she had believed was hers. Tonight, she thought she had won. She had no idea the game had already ended. Olivia sat frozen in the dimly lit restaurant, her fingers still curled around the base of her wineglass, but the warmth had long since drained from her skin. The envelope sat between them like an unspoken threat, untouched yet impossible to ignore. Julian's calm, deliberate exit replayed in her mind, each step he took away from her amplifying the unfamiliar sensation twisting in her stomach. He had never walked away from her before, never left her with more questions than answers. He had always been predictable, always patient, always the man she could manipulate with a soft smile or an apology whispered in the dark. But something was different now. For the first time in years, Olivia felt the stirrings of something foreign. Doubt. She reached for the envelope, but her hand hovered just above it before pulling away. Not here, not in public. She wouldn't give Julian the satisfaction of reacting, of making a scene. Instead, she forced her pulse to steady, exhaling through her nose before taking a slow sip of her wine. A single glance around the restaurant told her that no one was watching. Good. She wouldn't let him rattle her. By the time Olivia arrived home, her usual confidence had returned, though it was forced and fragile. She slipped off her heels at the door, tossing her purse onto the marble countertop of their pristine designer kitchen. Their home, her home, was as immaculate as always, a testament to the life she had built, the life she had secured. Julian had always been an afterthought, a necessary fixture in the backdrop of her success. She had made sure he would never leave, made sure he would always need her more than she needed him. So why did his parting words feel like a carefully set trap? She turned the envelope over in her hands, its weight suddenly heavier than it should have been. Tearing it open, her manicured fingers fished out the contents inside, and just like that, the world she had so carefully constructed shattered in an instant. Photographs. Dozens of them, crisp, undeniable, perfectly timed captures of her tangled in another man's arms. The lighting varied, some in dim hotel hallways, others in the harsh fluorescent glow of underground parking garages. And then there were the worst ones. The ones taken from inside their own home, their bed. Her breath hitched, heart slamming against her ribs as she flipped through them, each image a colder betrayal than the last. Then she saw the documents, divorce papers, filed, processed, and signed. And then the final piece, the court order. Olivia's hands trembled as she read the bold, unforgiving text. Frozen assets. Legal battles she hadn't even been aware of unfolding behind her back. He had moved everything, played the game in silence while she had been too busy underestimating him. Julian hadn't just left her, he had obliterated her. A sharp, strangled sound escaped her throat before she could stop it. No, this wasn't possible. She had won. She had always won. Fumbling for her phone, she dialed Julian's number, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. The call rang once, twice, then straight to voicemail. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she tried again. Nothing. Panic clawed its way up her throat, raw and unfamiliar. She dropped the papers onto the countertop, pressing a shaking hand to her temple. This had to be a mistake. A bluff. Julian had always been the quiet, reserved type, the kind of man who endured rather than acted. He wasn't capable of this level of strategy, of cold precision. Was he? She tore through the documents again, searching for any loophole, any detail she could use to regain control. But the more she read, the clearer the reality became. Julian had planned this for months. Every dinner where he had smiled and nodded while she lied to his face, every moment he had let her believe he was oblivious, it had all been part of his game. She had spent so much time mocking his patience, mistaking his silence for weakness, never once considering that he had been watching, calculating, waiting. The realization left her breathless. Julian had been playing the long game, and she had never even seen it coming. Olivia stood motionless in the middle of the kitchen, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching the divorce papers as if she could will them to disappear. The room around her, once a sanctuary of control and order, felt suddenly foreign, hostile even. The sleek marble counters, the polished glass cabinets, the expensive appliances, all of it was hers. Or at least, it had been. Her breathing was uneven, her chest tightening with a pressure she hadn't felt in years. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. Think. There had to be a way to fix this. There was always a way to fix things. She had manipulated Julian before, twisted him around her little fingers, except she didn't even know where he was. Her phone was still clutched in her other hand, the unanswered call sitting on the screen like an open wound. She tried again. Straight to voicemail. Her fingers tightened around the device until her knuckles turned white. Julian never ignored her calls. Never. No matter how tense things had been between them, no matter how much she had suspected, she had always been able to pull him back in with the right words, the right tone, the right tearful apology. But tonight, he was gone. The weight of that truth pressed down on her, and for the first time in years, Olivia felt something dangerously close to fear. She flipped through the papers again, her eyes scanning the text, searching for something, anything, that would give her a foothold, a way to regain control. The financial freeze, the house, the assets. Everything was laid out in perfect, excruciating clarity. Julian hadn't just left her. He had dismantled her. Her stomach twisted as she realized what this meant. She was trapped. The affair. What did it matter? It had been nothing, a distraction, a thrill. Julian had always been the safe choice, the predictable one. The man who never questioned, never fought back. He had been steady, patient, boring. She had thought she could have it all, her lifestyle, her status, her financial security, and the excitement she craved on the side, but Julian had been playing a game she never even knew existed. She walked toward the living room, each step unsteady. The house, so pristine and curated, felt empty, cold. It had never felt like this before, even on the nights when she had lied about late meetings and business trips. Back then, the thrill of deception had been intoxicating. She had won over and over again, savoring the knowledge that Julian would never leave, never do anything. But now, as she stood in the middle of the home she was no longer sure she owned, she realized just how badly she had lost. She needed to talk to him. No, confront him. Julian wasn't allowed to do this to her. A rush of anger flared through her, momentarily burning away the creeping panic. He was still her husband. For now. He owed her an explanation. He owed her a chance to fix this. Dragging in a steadying breath, she moved toward the bar cart and poured herself a drink, ignoring the way her hand shook. Control yourself. She downed the liquid in one sharp swallow, barely registering the burn. Then she grabbed her keys. If Julian wouldn't pick up his phone, she would find him herself. She knew exactly where he would be. 20 minutes later, Olivia pulled up to the private apartment Julian had kept downtown for years. It was a corporate space, one he used when he had to stay late for work or host business partners. He had never actually lived there. Until now. The building was sleek, modern, discreet. A place where men like Julian, powerful but unassuming, could exist without drawing attention. As she stepped out of the car, the night air was cool against her flushed skin, but it did nothing to calm the storm raging inside her. She strode toward the entrance, her heels clicking against the pavement, her mind racing. What would she say? She hadn't planned that far ahead, but it didn't matter. She would say whatever she needed to. She would make him listen. Olivia entered the lobby, her heels barely making a sound against the marble floor. The doorman, a man in his early 50s who had worked there for years, gave her a polite but unreadable nod. "Mrs. Carter," he said smoothly. "It's been a while." Her stomach tightened at the title. Mrs. Carter. Was she even that anymore? "Yes," she said, forcing a smile. "I'm here to see my husband." The man hesitated for half a second. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Olivia saw it. "Mr. Carter asked not to be disturbed," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. Olivia's nails dug into her palm. "I'm not a disturbance," she said, her tone icy. "I'm his wife." The doorman didn't move, but his expression didn't change either. "I understand, ma'am, but Mr. Carter was very clear about not receiving visitors tonight." A sharp, hot pulse of humiliation shot through her. She was locked out, not just ignored, not just avoided, denied access. Julian had expected this. He had anticipated her, and he had shut her out before she even arrived. Olivia took a slow step back, her mind whirling. She had come here to regain control, to shake him out of whatever fantasy he had convinced himself of. She had expected anger, confrontation, something, but not this. Not complete indifference. She swallowed, forcing herself to nod. "Fine," she said coolly, turning on her heel and walking back toward the exit, though every step felt like a battle against the urge to scream. As she pushed through the doors and stepped into the night, she pulled out her phone. One last call. One last chance. She dialed voicemail. Her lips parted slightly, her breath uneven. Then, as if to drive the knife in deeper, a text popped up on her screen. "Julian, don't call again. There's nothing left to talk about." For the first time, Olivia felt the full weight of what was happening. For the first time, she realized she wasn't in control anymore. Olivia sat in her car outside Julian's apartment, her phone still clutched in her trembling hand. The words on the screen, "Don't call again. There's nothing left to talk about," burned into her mind like a cruel brand. The finality of it sent a sharp, visceral panic through her veins, something she hadn't felt in years. She had always held the power in their marriage, always dictated the pace of their relationship, controlled the emotional temperature, decided when to fight and when to make up. But this was Julian walking away. No, worse, Julian shutting her out completely. Her fingers tightened around the phone as if she could crush his message out of existence. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He was supposed to be devastated, begging for an explanation, struggling to understand why she had done what she did. He was supposed to be caught in a web of emotions, anger, betrayal, love, all tangled together in a way that still kept her at the center. Instead, he had simply walked away. Olivia had always assumed Julian was weak. He had never raised his voice at her, never put up a fight, never given her the kind of resistance that made things interesting. That's why she had never truly feared losing him. He had always been there, always steady, always willing to let her have her way. Except he hadn't been weak at all, had he? He had waited until she was fully convinced of her invincibility, until she had gone so far in her betrayal that there was no way to undo it. Waited until he had the upper hand, until he had stripped her of everything. Her stomach twisted as she replayed every conversation they had in the last few months. The way he had listened, nodding patiently, his face unreadable as she fed him half-truths and outright lies. The way he had never once accused her, never demanded answers, never given her the satisfaction of a real fight, because he had already won. The truth settled over her like a suffocating weight. Julian had been preparing this for months, maybe even longer. He had been gathering evidence, moving assets, ensuring that when the moment came, she would be the one left scrambling for control. A fresh wave of anger rose in her chest. No, she refused to accept this. Olivia took a deep breath and squared her shoulders, forcing the panic to subside. There was still a way to salvage this. She just had to be smarter. He wasn't completely gone yet. She still had access to their legal connections, still had friends who could pull strings. Julian might have planned this meticulously, but no plan was airtight. She scrolled through her contacts, her mind racing. Who could she call? Who could help her undo this mess before it was too late? Her lawyer? No. Julian had likely already gotten to him. A financial advisor? No. Her accounts were frozen. Then she hesitated. There was one person who might still be useful. She pressed the call button, tapping her nails impatiently against the steering wheel as the phone rang. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Olivia?" The male voice on the other end sounded amused, as if he already knew why she was calling. Her grip tightened. "Ethan, we need to talk." A chuckle. "I was wondering when you'd reach out." Ethan Wallace, her lover, her mistake, the man who had been a temporary thrill, never meant to be anything more. He was charming, reckless, and utterly useless in a crisis. But tonight, She had no choice. I need your help, she said, keeping her voice controlled, confident. Help? He let the word hang between them, teasing. That's interesting, considering you've never needed me for anything before. Olivia clenched her jaw. This was not the time for games. Julian knows, she said bluntly, and he's not just leaving, he's taking everything. There was a brief silence on the other end, then a low whistle. Damn. Didn't peg him for the revenge type. Neither had she exhaled sharply. I need to meet now. All right, no need to sound so desperate. She wanted to snap at him, to remind him that she was the one in control. But was she? Was she really? 30 minutes later, she was sitting across from Ethan in a dimly lit hotel bar, swirling a glass of whiskey she had no intention of drinking. Ethan was as smug as ever, his dark eyes studying her with barely hidden amusement. I have to say, he said, leaning back in his chair, seeing you this rattled is kind of a turn-on. Olivia ignored the comment, her focus sharp. I need information, connections. If Julian's planned this, there has to be a way to counter it. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Sweetheart, he's already executed it. Her fingers curled into a fist against the table. You don't know that. He sighed, swirling the ice in his drink. Look, Olivia, you played the game and you lost. Julian was smarter than both of us. She hated hearing it. Hated it. She shook her head. There's always a way to turn things around. If I can just... Ethan held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. You really don't get it, do you? His tone shifted, losing its playfulness. Julian's done with you. He's not waiting for you to beg, not hoping you'll come crawling back. He's not angry, not brokenhearted. He's free. The words sliced through her. She had never even considered that Julian might want to be rid of her, that he might have been waiting for this, not as an act of vengeance, but as an escape. She had assumed he would always be there, lingering in the background of her life, no matter what she did. But Julian wasn't lingering. He had walked away. And for the first time, there was no way to pull him back. Olivia sat in the dim hotel bar long after Ethan had left, her untouched whiskey now watered down by melted ice. The noise of conversations and clinking glasses blurred into the background, but her thoughts remained razor sharp. For the first time in her life, she had no plan, no control, no way out. She had been so sure she would always be the one with the upper hand, but Julian had outplayed her. She checked her phone again, even though she already knew what she would see. No new messages, no missed calls. The last text from Julian. Don't call again. There's nothing left to talk about. Stared back at her like a death sentence. A sick feeling settled in her stomach. Was this what he had felt all those months? The quiet dread of knowing something was coming, but being powerless to stop it? Had he sat in silence, watching the life he thought was his slip away, just like she was now? No, she wouldn't accept this. Olivia had spent years bending situations in her favor, pulling strings and shaping the narrative to suit her needs. Julian was still her husband, at least on paper. That meant there was still time. She stood abruptly, leaving her drink untouched, and walked out of the bar. By the time she reached his house now, it was nearly midnight. The drive had been silent, just the hum of the tires against the road and the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her. The sprawling mansion, once a symbol of her success, now loomed before her like a stranger's home. She let herself in with her key, surprised it still worked. Maybe Julian hadn't thought to change the locks yet, or maybe he wanted her to see what he had done. The house was silent, but it wasn't empty. Boxes, labeled, stacked neatly in the grand living room. Her breath hitched. Julian had already moved out. He had packed his things and left. Not just metaphorically. Literally, she walked forward in a daze, her heels clicking against the marble floor. In all the time she had known Julian, she had never seen him rush into anything. He was methodical, slow-moving, always thinking a dozen steps ahead. But this was decisive. A letter sat on the coffee table, her name written in his careful handwriting. With trembling hands, she picked it up and unfolded the crisp paper. Olivia, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I won't tell you where, 'cause it doesn't matter, not to you. I gave you everything, time, trust, patience, but you mistook it for weakness. That was your first mistake. You assumed I would always be here, waiting in the background, letting you live your double life. That was your second mistake. And your third? Believing that you would never face consequences. Now you have. The house, the cars, the money, they were never yours. You simply borrowed them while I allowed it. And now that time is over. I won't fight you. I won't argue. There is nothing to discuss. You played the game, Olivia, and you lost. Don't come looking for me. You wouldn't find me even if you tried. Julian, the paper trembled in her hands. The room, the walls, the air around her. It all felt too small, too tight, closing in on her as the finality of it all crashed down. She sank onto the couch, the letter slipping from her fingers. For years, Olivia had believed she was untouchable, that no matter what she did, no matter how reckless, Julian would always be there. But now she was alone. For the first time, she had no safety net, no backup plan, no one left to manipulate. Julian wasn't waiting for her to fix things. He had moved on, and she had nothing